So, our question today is, what are the benefits of growth driven website design? Let's just start with that. Can you kind of define growth driven website design for us?
Sure. Growth-driven design, or as GDD is sometimes called, is a sort of website design and build methodology developed actually by HubSpot um, that um, takes a sort of different approach from traditional web design by sort of the two big things are focusing on getting a um, better website up and running than your old one as quickly as possible, and also making sure that that website over time is being improved and developed using like real data and actual metrics from users on your site, as opposed to sort of what a lot of companies will do in a traditional website design, which is they sort of set and forget. They build the whole thing. They take X number of months to do it and then sort of leave it alone and wipe their hands of it. So that's sort of the sort of core of it.
So, it's faster and maybe a little bit more nimble than a typical website design process.
Yes. So it comes in three stages, and I'm going to quote a little bit directly from HubSpot here. First stage is strategy, which they define as develop an empathetic understanding of your audience's world and how the website can solve problems along their journey. And so before you're even doing any building, you're thinking, you do a lot of what you would normally do. You think about, your customers, exactly what they need, how you're solving for their problems, and how you think you can best do that. But doing so in a way that you make as few assumptions as possible. Because you got to make some. And of course, as a business, you tend to know your audience well. Um, but what they need and the best way to give it to them doesn't always align with what you might normally think. And so just saying, what do we absolutely need? What do we know that they want? Um, and like I said, make as few assumptions as possible. And then moving on to stage two, which is creating what's dubbed a launchpad site. And that's a site. It's supposed to be as quote unquote small as possible, very streamlined. Like I said, building that site with only those base assumptions and ideally nothing more. They define it as quickly build a website that looks and performs better than what you have today, but it's not a final product. Rather, your launchpad is the foundation on which to build and optimize from. And so, a lot of times, these websites will contain the sort of, at the very least, like all those evergreen pages, things like the home page, the about page, the contact page, and then probably, a smattering of core pages that are core to your services or offerings that you provide your customers. And then once that website's up and live, which by doing and doing it so that you're just doing as little as possible, always gets the thing up and quicker. So you're getting more value faster and sooner than you would if you were to build out your full website and everything that you think you could possibly ever need. And then moving on to continuous improvement, which is it says with the Launchpad site live and collecting user data, you can start identifying the high impact actions you can take to grow your business. So, like I said, as opposed to just setting it and forgetting it, you instead are constantly monitoring your website, constantly monitoring your user activity, seeing what actions they're taking that actually drive them towards, making some kind of, purchase. And by doing it in that way, sort of following what they do, your website is uh, actually improving in ways that actually work, as opposed to sort of crossing your fingers and hoping that all the stuff that you decided on beforehand to build your website out in full is going to work. So it's a much more like active mindset, treating your website like it's a living, breathing organism that is always going to need improvements, and you need to follow where your customers are going and not where you think they should go, stuff like that. So
I love that. I think I've known about growth driven website design for a while and I've never really thought about it in that perspective. But from how you explained it, I think it's really neat because I feel like so many companies, when they take on a website project, they're like, okay, this is going to be a huge investment. It's going to take 6 months, a year, whatever that looks like. And then we're good for like 4 or 5 years. And like you said, especially with digital, like things change and like your customers change so quickly. So being able to be like more agile, I think is a huge benefit that you laid out for us. So when we get into using this strategy, how do you suggest businesses go about implementing a growth driven website design process?
Sure. Um, so as you mentioned, people will build out their whole websites and then sort of set it for 4 or 5 years and forget about it. And oftentimes those projects are going, over budget and over time, and you're missing deadlines and all this stuff. And so that first like Launchpad site is the thing that's hopefully going to, avoid a lot of those things where you're getting things up a lot quicker. Um, but the what you really need to do is sort of get into a different kind of mindset because that's really what this is. You're still, going through you're still strategizing about, what your clients need and writing the best content that you can, and your designers are doing the best work they can, and building out a website that works well and is, ADA compliant and responsive. Like you're still doing all of that, but again, it's about changing that mindset. So oftentimes businesses will have these like these massive wish lists of all the things that they want on their site, and they might not be willing to like push it live until all those things exist. And of course, as time goes on, more stuff gets added inevitably, and so that's one of the things that really pushes things out of scope. And so if you can change that mindset and say, okay, I'm only going to use what we absolutely need up on that website so that um, our customers can achieve their goals, buy your product, whatever it might be, and like I said, making as few assumptions about those customers as possible, and then just working to actually satisfy those needs through user behavior. Um, sort of, and then on the other big part of that mindset is actually following through with the methodology. I've seen it a number of times where people they'll build their Launchpad site, but they'll still kind of do a set it and forget. Like they'll do okay for a little bit, adding some new stuff that they probably would have wanted on the initial site anyways, but we, convinced them to do it in V2 after the Launchpad, and we'll get those few things up, and then they'll set and forget. But they need to have that mindset of continuous improvement, knowing that the website is always going to need more, is always going to need to be updated, is always going to need to be tweaked. That includes adding new stuff, removing old stuff, updating some of the stuff that's there to work better based on the data that they're getting from their users. And so making sure that you are actually following the methodology and keeping that mindset of we're never done and it doesn't have to be perfect, are really the things that businesses need to keep in mind when trying to implement this methodology.
Gotcha. Well, that kind of leads into my next question. I was going to ask like some common challenges you see people face during this process. It sounds like you listed a few, that changing of the mindset, the not truly committing to that continuous improvement, and still having that set it and forget it mentality. Are there any other challenges you typically see, or are those the big ones?
Oh, those are definitely the big ones. Um, but in addition to that, and it really, and I'm going to keep, really pounding this mindset idea because that's really what it is. Um, I talked about a little bit like sort of the launchpad phase and the continuous improvement phase, but even in the strategy phase, um, people can have, I don't want to insult people. Hubris is the wrong word, but you know what I mean? Like this sort of idea that like because they've been in this business forever, they've personally experienced, what it's like to, to have this, to want this thing, or to need to be met, that they know exactly what their customer base wants and needs, and they do to some extent. They wouldn't be in this business if they weren't at least if they didn't at least have some idea of what they want and need. But by sort of putting those thoughts a bit on the back burner and saying, okay, like I know some of what they want, but probably not probably not, maybe not even a lot of exactly what they need, and just sort of letting their users actually dictate um, what they do with their website and the strategies that they take. And so that first strategy phase is an important one, but should be limited to some degree. Um, and so that's probably the other sort of big piece when it comes to GDD and those three steps.
Yeah. No, that's awesome and super interesting. Like I said, I have heard a little bit about growth driven design, but never to this extent. So I'm hoping people that are listening learned a lot, just like I did. And we do, at Evenbound, we do have blogs and resources about this topic. So definitely check those out. Um, Robert, if people wanted to connect with you, maybe continue this growth driven design conversation, are you open for any of that on LinkedIn or other platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is uh, Robert Gonzalez. I actually don't know what my my handle is, but yeah, but absolutely, you can. Yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter. I have a GitHub if you want to check it out. I don't know. You can't really start a conversation there, but but yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all good stuff. Well, thank you so much for jumping on. I'd love to have you back in the future. You're super knowledgeable about all things website development. So, like I said, thank you, and we'll definitely have you on in the future.
Of course. Thank you for having me.